Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. We're starting with a foundational, honestly kind of mind-bending question. How do courts actually measure the unseen reality of human conscience? I mean, think about it, like a giant puzzle. How can a judge, or any institution for that matter, look inside your head and figure out if what you believe is a genuine, legally protected religious conviction or just a really strong personal opinion?
Welcome to today's explainer. Today, we're unpacking a landmark legal decision, the 1965 United States versus Seeger case, and we're going to look at exactly how its reasoning intersects with modern identity frameworks. We'll be breaking down the importance of sincerity, conscience, and how a belief actually functions in your day-to-day life. Plus, we'll see why understanding this legal history is absolutely crucial in our digital world today.
Here's our roadmap for the explainer. We're going to define religion in court, dive into that 1965 Seeger decision, and look at the strict line between sincerity and personal preference. After that, we'll cover the limits of the law, and finally apply all this to the One Godian framework and how you document convictions. Let's get to it.
Section 1. Defining religion in court and the unique challenge of classifying human belief.
So defining religion in a legal sense gets incredibly tricky when you don't have a traditional church building or hierarchy. For centuries, Western law basically just looked for formal clergy, historical continuity, shared dogmas, the usual suspects, right? But what happens when someone's conscience operates totally outside those institutional walls? Well, this tension actually boiled over with the federal conscientious objector statute. Back during the military draft, the U.S. government allowed exemptions for folks opposed to war based on religious training and belief. And that forced the government into a really tough spot. They had to figure out whose pacifism was genuinely religious and whose was just, political or philosophical. Which brings us to Section 2, the 1965 Seeger decision. Now, the Supreme Court wrestled with this exact dilemma back in 1965. We had this guy, Daniel Andrew Seeger, who claimed conscientious objector status, but he explicitly said he wasn't part of any specific religious group. He even hesitated to affirm a belief in a traditional supreme being. If you read the statute strictly, he would have been flat out denied. But the court did something brilliant here. They asked, does this belief occupy a place in the life of the possessor parallel to that filled by God in traditionally religious persons? They completely shifted the focus. It wasn't just about what a person believed anymore, it was about how that belief functioned in their life. And this reasoning gives us three key components to evaluate conviction. Number one, the belief has to be sincerely held. It genuinely has to be real inside the person, no faking it. Number two, it must occupy that parallel place, meaning it functions as your ultimate North Star, guiding your major life decisions. And three, it's got to go way beyond just a personal philosophy, a political stance, or an economic theory. We're talking about a true binding duty of conscience. Moving to Section 3, sincerity versus personal preference. Exactly where do courts draw this line? This right here is absolutely crucial. You have to understand the massive difference between a casual lifestyle choice and a binding duty. Let's say you tell someone, I prefer a vegan diet for my personal health and wellness. Okay, great, that's a personal philosophy or a health choice. But if you say, my conscience dictates a binding duty to all living things parallel to a traditional religious mandate, well, you've fundamentally shifted the categorization. You've moved from a nice-to-have option to an absolute, non-negotiable duty that builds your entire moral architecture. But you have to remember this. Sincerity is an internal reality. You cannot just manufacture a sincerely held belief by filling out a piece of paper, signing a form, or joining an organization. The actual, genuine sincerity has to exist deep in your conscience first. Your internal reality absolutely must match the external claim. All right, Section 4, the limits of the law and why Seeger isn't some magic legal loophole. Okay, pause right here because we need a massive educational disclaimer. And again, this is not individualized legal advice. The Seeger decision is absolutely not a magic cheat code. Meeting these criteria does not automatically hand you a religious-free pass, First Amendment protection, or instant exemptions under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. You've got to remember, Seeger was about interpreting one very specific federal conscientious objector statute. Nowadays, courts look at a massive, complex web of constitutional principles, specific statutes, factual context, and decades of newer case law. So passing a Seeger test does not guarantee you instant institutional recognition. Section 5. Applying Seeger to One Godian. Let's look at modern frameworks and institutional armor. So why does this legal history matter today? Because it gives us vital context for modern philosophical identity systems like One Godian. Authored by Gregory L. Jones, One Guardian acts like a universal protocol. Think of it kind of like the TCP/IP of spirituality. It emphasizes one God, divine unity, conscience, and human dignity. It's a founder-created framework centered entirely on the absolute unity of a singular source, but it does all of this without operating as a traditional religious denomination. And the contrast is pretty stark when you look at it. Established religions have that historical continuity, strict doctrines, and clergy. But the One Guardian framework? It's a legally disciplined system backed by U.S. copyright. It acts as a metaphysical operating system. It requires conceptual alignment, not dogmatic rituals. It's specifically designed to be a clear, modern identity framework that doesn't try to compete with or replace established religions. This explicit compliance disclaimer is a huge deal. By stating clearly what it is not, the framework creates what we'd call institutional armor. This makes sure that banks, regulators, and courts don't misclassify it as an organized religion with ecclesiastical authority, which saves everyone a ton of unnecessary regulatory headaches. This framework basically lays out a clear three-step path. First, you have that internal realization of absolute unity, the core belief in one God. Second, you align conceptually with the One Guardian algorithm. And third, you practically articulate that belief through a structured process, documenting your identity via the OHI declaration. It beautifully connects your internal compass with a formal external protocol. Section 6. Documenting sincere convictions and the role of the OHI declaration. So how do you actually bridge that invisible reality of your conscience with the very visible demands of institutions? Well, the One Guardian framework uses the OIGI declaration generator. This tool allows individuals to formally translate those abstract internal beliefs into structured documentation. Conceptually, this lines up perfectly with demonstrating the kind of sincerity courts look for in the Seeger reasoning. It clearly separates your core identity from just a casual hobby or fleeting secular philosophy. But I have to reiterate this one more time. Filling out this declaration does not, by itself, establish legal status or guarantee you win any sort of legal outcome. The paperwork merely documents the belief. For it to carry any actual weight, the belief itself truly has to occupy that parallel, guiding place in your life. You literally cannot generate sincerity from a structured process. It has to originate deep inside your own conscience. I love this quote because it hits the nail on the head. Institutions aren't out there looking for the ultimate metaphysical truth of the universe. They're looking for sincerity, structural consistency, and clear classification. Understanding history like the Seeger case shows us exactly why structure and precise disciplines language matter so much in the modern legal world. So it all comes down to this one question. Do you truly understand the foundation of your own sincerely held beliefs? If someone pressed you on it, could you articulate them clearly? I highly encourage you to go study United States versus Seeger for yourself. Dive into the history of freedom of conscience and religious liberty, and really interrogate what drives your own moral compass. And if you're curious about how modern frameworks are tackling these age-old questions of unity and identity, definitely go check out the educational resources over at oneguardian.org. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. I'll catch you next time.